Thank you, Steve, for your excellent presentation. I think it's really very helpful for all of us to have a better understanding of what's going on. And I think you outlined the global growth and what China's contribution can be and continue to be challenges, opportunities, but also you talk about the experience of other nations like Japan, India, and then you talk about continuously what are the problems that we're having now. So this is great. I mean, this is very good overview. And now we want to get into a dialogue section. And I would like to ask you some questions. First, you mentioned about this IMF forecast. I think that was very interesting because IMF actually recently they mentioned that projected growth for 2024 will be 5%, right? Up from 4.5%. Actually, I know 4.5% in 2025. So they actually increased their projection by 0.4%, and so this is interesting. But also you mentioned those, of course, the trend is coming down, and so the question I would like to ask is that, of course, China, with the magnitude, with the size of its economy and such a big second largest economy, they cannot, when the bases are low, they have a lot of a big percentage. But even now today, even 5% or 4.5%, probably equal to 10% 10 years ago, or 15% 20 years ago. So every year there's a large equivalent of, I don't know if it's Australia or Indonesia GDP added to China, and also the other thing is they are now from high speed growth to high quality, and for example, I remember many years ago they were talking about 700 million shares to exchange for 1.747. Now China become the largest automobile exporter in the world. So there's a lot of quality changes. How do you interpret that? Even though the speed may come down, but the quality may pick up, and that is still needed. And then how we can really continue that kind of from high speed to high quality, and what are the things we still need to be cautious of, and how we can really continue that positive momentum, even though we're not achieving the high speed we used to have.
Well, you touch on a few things, Henry. One, the IMF's forecast revision. Half a point, in the way that forecasting accuracy goes these days, it's an upward revision, but it doesn't change the basic story of an economy that is still growing at best about half the pace that it did in the high growth era when the Chinese economy grew 10% for 31 years from 1980 to 2011. You're right that as the base gets bigger, smaller increments mean more. But my point on the growth shock that I tried to end with is that this has been abrupt. The slowdown has been concentrated in the last few years, and when China was growing rapidly for much, much longer than anybody thought, the expectations were built in that China and the world could count on rapid growth, irrespective of the base effects going forward. And this notion that the leadership continues to boast about in addressing global forums like the China Development Forum, and I heard Premier Li say this at the China Development Forum at the end of March, that China accounts for, I think the number he used was 35% of global growth. That's out of date. That number is no longer accurate and it's going to get smaller. Your final point, though, is, I think, the most important, and that is moving away from a focus on the quantity to the quality of growth. I've had the privilege and the opportunity of making speeches in this country for, every year of the last quarter century, and I've always pounded the table on precisely that, shifting from a fixation on quantity to improved quality of economic growth. How do we measure the quality of economic growth? You can measure it through environmental metrics, and I was delighted to wake up this morning and drive across town and see a beautiful blue sky in Beijing, and I think there has been some improvement in air quality in China over the last, 10 years. My favorite scientific metric for quality, though, is total factor of productivity. And the trend there is worrisome. From the 2011 to 2019 period, a 10-year period, TFP growth, as we call it, has been dropping by a little over 1% a year. And that follows a big upsurge in the prior 15 years. And that is a worrisome sign of deteriorating quality of Chinese economic growth because it raises questions about the efficiency of labor and capital in generating sustained growth in overall economic output. You cannot have high quality growth with weak TFP. And a final metric to think about, and it gets a lot of discussion in China, is measures of the equality or inequality of the income distribution. And the conclusion is pretty straightforward based on most metrics that China, and China's not alone in this respect, certainly has problems with mounting income inequality as well.
Thank you, Steve. Excellent point. I think, absolutely, I think we need to address all those inequality and that common prosperity. That is really China. The better life of the people is really the target of a government to strive for. And while maintaining high quality, we have to maintain equality. So that's really a good point. But I'd like to also touch upon the other issue you raised. You talk about Japan, you talk about the aging population, and then whether China going to repeat what Japan has gone through, and also what are the impetus, what are the next drive for the Chinese economy. The real estate market is also mentioned that it's slowing down. And so what are the next biggest transformative policy that the government can propose? So here I'd like to discuss a bit of our thinking with you. Is that, for example, we have the third planning of the 20th Party Congress is going to have in July. We are expecting a lot of new policies. We are thinking. You talk about real estate. Premier Li mentioned at the China Development Forum in March this year that urbanization of 300 million migrant workers would be probably the big next drive. So I'm thinking, how we can translate that into a concrete policy in addition to trade-in and other policies. I'm thinking of, for example, in the last 45 years of China opening up, there's every 10 years, there's always a revolutionary policy that drives up the process. For example, in the 80s, the government had a policy of contract the land for the farmers to grow whatever they like, to break away of a planned economy, and we changed the Chinese society from a society of a shortage to a society of abundance. So that policy has really changed China dramatically. And then second decade policy was that government realized, the real estate market in the cities, why can't we allocate flats for the workers and the citizens, urban residents in the cities? Privatize that almost, very minimum cost. And so everybody in the city has apartment or buy apartment. That actually cultivated the 400 million middle class. And then in the year of 2000 afterwards, China joined WTO. It's another revolutionary policy where they have, there's a handful of SOE does the trade, did the trade, but now, 6 million companies can conduct foreign trade, and China become the largest trading nation in the world. So for the last 10, 15 years, we are thinking, where are the next low-hanging fruit revolutionary policy that we can tap into? So Premier Lee's actually, his comment at the China Development Forum stimulated me to think. We are now have urbanization. You also mentioned in your presentation about, Japan, other countries, 80%, or Western country, US. China is only 66%, according to the Premier Lee. But only 50% has the hukou and city resident benefit. The other 16 does not have it. So we talk about 300 million migrant workers live in the city, but they are not enjoying the city rights. So the reason for that is they have a household land in the rural area. So the rural area household land is empty with seniors and youngsters, but also they are renting a big, lot of apartments in the city. So there's a lot of redundancy and waste. So I'm thinking, if we can really, like in the 90s, privatize the apartment for the workers, can we, allow the farmers who are already settled in the city to sell their household land in the rural area, and so that they can get first startup capital to buy the real estate second-hand down payment in the cities, and avoid this 9 billion people travel around during the Chinese New Year visiting each other, and also to make social justice. So would that be a low hand for the biggest policy that we can hope for? And I would like to hear your comments on that. Thank you, Steve.
I think it's a great idea, Henry. I like your thinking. I would like to broaden it out, though, because you introduced this by saying every 10 to 15 years, there's a big change that injects new energy, a new source of growth into China. And I have been pounding the table for longer than I care to remember about the need for a new impetus to household sector private consumption in China. The numbers are very clear. The latest share of Chinese GDP going to private household consumption is below 38%. 38%, that's ridiculously low. Now, your proposal goes right to one aspect of that, and that is to the 300 million migrant workers who clearly have the potential to be tapped as a new source of consumption. I would say that that is necessary but not sufficient. So I'm endorsing you. But I would say of equal significance would be the need to really inject much more funding and vitality into the social safety net, healthcare and retirement, because I think that is the biggest impediment to discretionary consumption, because it keeps families who are aging rapidly predisposed toward precautionary saving in providing for the future. And to the extent that a non-significant portion of those families lack hukou because of their residency preference, that would be additive to that problem. So I would combine the two into a much broader program aimed at injecting new stimulus into private household consumption in China. I think it's a good idea, but it's not enough on its own. Just say one other thing about the current Chinese policy strategy. Like you, I was also at the China Development Forum and heard Premier Li address policy priorities for China. And he repeated a theme that he had emphasized in his work report a month earlier to the National People's Congress, saying that the real priority, the most important priority, is focusing on new productive forces aimed at boosting manufacturing and, in particular, a new round of export-led growth in China. He mentioned, in addition to that, the need to stimulate domestic demand along the lines of what you and I have been talking about. The first priority, though, is one that is clearly causing a lot of negative reaction in the U.S., increasingly in the G7, and it's all wrapped up in this excess capacity debate that I alluded to in my own comments. So, this twofold strategy is important for China, but it creates conflicts that I think are also problematic in shaping the growth outlook in this country.
Great, thank you, Steve. Absolutely, I agree. You mentioned that we should really have new, a strong impetus or stimulus or revolutionary policy that badly needed, not by China, but also for the world. I think real estate is one of the biggest factors because in the Chinese traditional thinking, if you have a piece of asset, then you are confident you're going to spend more. You're not going to take the wallet close to your chest and then withhold from spending. So I think stabilize the real estate market is crucial. And actually in China, I read somewhere there's an apartment building enough to house 200 million people. So 300 million migrant workers, if we move them to the cities and let them have a legitimate identity to live in the cities, they're going to contribute to the stability of China. Now, I'd like to ask you another question. You mentioned about just now new productive courses, new quality productive forces. Interesting, you also mentioned the tension on those tariffs. President Biden raised on the EV cars, batteries, and the solar, all those new green energy technology and products. Actually, according to the International Atomic Agency, in order to combat climate change, according to the Paris Accord, we probably need more, like at least 800 gigawatts of new green power to combat. And now we can only produce a quarter of that. And then the world needs to spend $4.5 trillion a year on the green spending. The world is only spending 1.8 trillion, far from oversupply. So I was even reading that the European government is considering to extend their, phasing out of the diesel gasoline-driven car. Originally it set by 2035, now it's extended to 2040 because they want to extend the life of diesel and the gasoline car. So if we are having a changing climate so badly, and it's really strange to see that U.S. and even sometimes Western countries are so calling for more products, more technology available to combat the climate change. Now China has developed that. Now they're refusing to have it, and they even put tariff on that. And 90% of the commercial flights is supplied by Boeing and Airbus. We don't see it's overcapacity. So I just want to get your opinion from non-Chinese. What do you think about we are urgently need green products in this world. And China, after so many years of experiment, hard working and trial, and of course with opening up of help of every country, now to have this product available, now the country says, no, you are over capacity. So what do you think? What's your take on this question?
I think it borders on insanity. In a world that is facing unmistakable signs of climate change, there is no such thing as excess capacity in non-carbon green energy products. If anything, there's a shortage of alternative energy products. China is providing an enormous service and a benefit to the world in producing low-cost, clean energy products that the world desperately needs to protect itself against the ravages of climate change. China has the technology, the scale, and therefore, by definition, the comparative advantage in delivering exactly what a climate-torn world needs. And we resist this purely for political pressures because we have this desire led by the United States to contain Chinese economic growth and development. We also have, as you have in China, national security concerns. I can think of no greater threat to national security than destabilizing the world's climate. And so if we're serious about looking at national security, or from the standpoint of the security of our planet, we need to be, I think, much more appreciative of the need to allow nations that have comparative advantage in giving the world what it needs support rather than resistance.
Thank you for your very good views that look at this issue. So I appreciate that. And absolutely, the world is is really burning. We need to really work together. Also, in you mentioned about the book you have. This would be my last question. I would like to open it up, but I'd like to ask you this question before I do so. You mentioned about the book, Accidental Conflict, American, China, and the Clash of False Narratives, which is exactly right on, because you gave me that book last year. I read it. I found it very fascinating. The perception of both countries, China and the West, and the US, and then, of course, the narratives are totally different. And so how can we really get more right narratives, of course? I mean, you talk about, for example, national security. There's too much emphasis on the national security now. There's a driving up, all those things. But equally important, even more important, climate security, food security, energy security, environment security, and
health security.
Health security, absolutely. The benefiting of the mind, human security. We recently had just a big symposium in Washington talk about human security. So I think those are really important. So how can we really gradually have the right narrative and have a global governance for those common concerns, rather than we develop into two camps? There's more security alliance built up, but on the other hand, China is doing a lot of economic alliance for the globalization. So how can we really converge that, and then maybe, China and the U.S. has a moral responsibility for the mind comfort, the human security. So exactly, I like the idea of a secretary office of a secretary for the China-U.S. relation. Be right on.
Well, let me just give you my theory behind your important question, Henry. When I started working on this book 4 or 5 years ago, I started out with some of the ideas that I summarized on the slides today, and that is that we have, in the United States, many false impressions about China. And then as I did the research, I said, wait a second. There's a number of false impressions that China has about the United States as well. And the reason that both nations have false impressions or false narratives about each other, and they have such important impacts on the policy actions that we take toward one another, is because of politics. We let political pressures drive wrong directional policies, in my view. That's true of trade policy in the US, and it's true of China's concerns about America's threat to its national sovereignty. So what I end the book on is recognizing that the politically driven process of engagement that both nations have embraced since the early 1970s is more driven by politicians than by technocrats. And politicians tend to operate on the basis of appealing to workers or promising their citizens a better life, and they get us into trouble. So my proposal is for a new organization that I call a U.S.-China Secretariat that really changes the architecture of engagement between the two superpowers, takes it out of the hands of the politicians, the leaders who are driven by their own personal political agendas. With all due respect, you have that same problem that we do, and puts it in the hands of technocrats who have a broad remit to deal with all aspects of the relationship, not just when the leaders meet once a year, but 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they deal with trade, economics, innovation policy, technology transfer, industrial policies, subsidies of state-owned enterprises, the big existential issues like health, cyber, climate. It's an organization that is built around a collaborative model of research based on a common, mutually agreed upon database. It's an organization that collectively works on the oversight and compliance of existing bilateral agreements. And should disputes arise, it screens disputes and has a built-in dispute resolution mechanism. We need a new architecture of engagement. The current structure is creating conflict as opposed to conflict resolution. And if we don't get serious about addressing our mutual issues, we will not have conflict resolution. We'll continue to have conflict escalation, and that is the biggest risk of accidental conflict. We've got to change it.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. That's absolutely crucial. I'm all for this proposal. You know, China, U.S. should really have a close working team. And also, you mentioned about the policy on both sides. Absolutely, I think, you know, we see this the U.S. of course because of globalization affecting many working class, and then, you know, but the real estate, the Wall Street is really making, you know, hitting all-time high. The 1% of Wall Street is equal to the 40-50% of the mass population in the U.S. And then the gap is big. There's a lot of social injustice. But then we cannot really have that all blamed on China because, you the business is making all the.
Politicians need someone to blame.
That's right.
That's why, again, I'm not in favor of a political solution to the type of superpower conflict that we have.
Absolutely. So I think on that note, I think we'll finish our dialogue. But I think I totally agree. We should increase dialogue, mutual exchanges, and of course, and create a new narrative of the China and the U.S. had a huge responsibility for the human security and for the future to come. So on that note, we have to conclude because our time has come to running out. And I really would like to, on behalf of Center for China Globalization, thank Steve for this excellent presentation and exchanges and dialogue, and also with our participants. We have several ambassadors, we have many diplomats and international journalists, think tank scholars, so really a great exchange we had today. And of course, we're going to share this online and to our audience in China and outside China. And this is really a good occasion at this, really timely exchange on those new American policies on China and economic development and China, China-U.S. relations. So as a top expert in this respect, we really appreciate your insights, your suggestions, your proposals, and your advice. So on behalf of all the audience here again, I'd like to thank you, and also I would like to give you a few books that CCG produced as token appreciation. We had a book from Graham Allison, from Joseph and I, and also one of my books. So thank you for coming.